Thank you very much for having me. I am well aware that I'm standing between you and lunch, so I'll have to try and get a move on. So here's a picture of some famous revolutions, and I only put them up there because what I'd like to suggest is we do need a revolution in psychiatry, and you're the group to lead it. So I was asked to talk about my life as a psychiatrist, clinician and researcher. I started off as a bass guitarist for the Metropolitan Dog Turds, a famous group, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about. And well, actually, we had 2 gigs, and they were both in the Knot, which is the pub that is near Monash University. So, you know, that's as far as it got. Although the group has met occasionally since then, I still play bass guitar, lead guitar, and the name of that group is now Dystonia. So, you know, we still haven't won Grammys. I'm sure that, you know, our big break is just around the corner, and I'll just leave all of this and then become a rock star. This is me now, serious academic. Well, it's not really, it's a Bollywood actress, but, you know, we look the same. Okay, why did I do psych research? Well, in the first instance, I was fascinated by and did a lot of emergency medicine. I don't know whether it was the drama that appealed or what it was, but I really loved it. And at one point, one crazy point in my life, I was actually enrolled in both colleges, both the Emergency Medicine College and the College of Psychiatry. And I was therefore doing 2 training at the same time. That is not something I would recommend that any of you do. So in the end, the psychiatry mentor, and it was Professor David Kopilov, said, "This is ridiculous, you need to make a decision." And what turned my head away from emergency medicine was that I really enjoyed it, but I felt that it was very piecemeal. So what I was doing was patching up people who were in front of me, but I never really got to see what happened longer term. I didn't get to follow their stories, whereas the work I was doing in psychiatry did actually give me a really good insight and in-depth knowledge of the patient, because I got to ask them about all facets of their being. And as I said, I had some great mentors, again, that I would underline what the other speakers have talked about in terms of mentorship. So I ended up going into psych training. And since then, I've railed against the profession. Now, I would recommend that when you go into whatever it is that you're going into, have a healthy degree of curiosity and scepticism. And it's always, the worst comments are, "We're doing this because we've always done it this way." And I think that in psychiatry is one of the biggest issues that we have. There are too many people who are still doing things because that's the way it's always been. And I think it's really critical in this revolution that we're blowing our trumpets to start today, that you ask why and can we do it better. I met a number of really amazing women patients in the Royal Park Psychiatry back ward. So in the days when I trained, there was the asylums, the big asylums everywhere in Australia, and in Victoria we had several. There was Royal Park Hospital, Larundel Hospital, the horrible old buildings where they were falling down, they were cold, they didn't have heating. In the back wards there was inhumanities like women patients. There was just a whole bunch of grey cottontail underpants, and they were just dished out, so there was no privacy, there was no individualism for the patient. It was pretty bad. But in there, I met a number of really incredible women who I spent quite a bit of time doing extra work with them, because what I learnt from these patients is a lot of the patients said, "I didn't have a problem with my mental health until I had babies." So there were several women there who had, now not babies, but you know, their postpartum mental illness carried on and had developed into full-blown schizophrenia and so on. There were assaults, sexual assaults on patients by other patients. That continues today. Okay, so we still have the situation. You can see why I'm saying, you know, we need to revolutionise psychiatry. We are so far behind the other disciplines that you've heard about today. So I'm saying this to you not to go put you off. but to actually throw down the challenge. As my children say, your generation created climate change, and my medical student daughter says, your generation created antibiotic resistance. So, you know, we've done a lot of bad things, but we could actually also sow the seeds of training the next generations to actually pick up this gauntlet and improve psychiatry, because mental health is a big, big health burden. The biggest by the time we move into the latter part or the middle part of this century. So the discussion with the female patients, the stories of postpartum psychosis, the other stories put together, some animal work that I was interested in, led me to work in the area of hormones and the HPG axis, the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, and the CNS impacts, the brain impacts thereof. I always had a fascination with neurobiology, and I was absolutely pretty much on my own in Melbourne with this. I did have a couple of people who, again, one was Henry Berger, who is a obstetrician gynecology endocrinology researcher, not in my field, and he was particularly kind to me and read some really crappy early research drafts and very kindly fixed them up with me. And not once did he say, this is really awful, which is really nice. You should be able to ask the dumbest of dumb questions and still be helped. And so I expanded the neurobiology by using and working with expertise from around the world, because it wasn't available locally, and also reaching out to colleagues from other disciplines. And I still think that's the best way to move this field forward. It's not going to be moved forward by talking to the same old people. We really need new ideas from other fields, and I'm delighted that at the moment my research group is situated within Alfred Brain, not in Alfred Psychiatry, which means that my colleagues on a day-to-day basis are neurologists, neurosurgeons, neuropsychologists, and we have some really big picture items that I'm going to tell you a little bit about. But I say this, in whatever field you're in, go outside it, talk to people outside it, because what you can then do is bring new ideas and explore them in a sound research methodology to move your field forward. We have lots to do. There is still confusion in the public about mental health and mental illness. And so what happens is politicians grab hold of this and they fund mental health and then say they've funded mental illness. They are not the same. Mental health is what I hope all of you have, which is a sense of well-being, a sense of happiness, and if that drops a bit because you're stressed by exams, stressed by writing a thesis, stressed by difficult relationships, whatever, you need to take actions to help yourself. But that's helping your mental health, hopefully not developing major depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and so on. And so such things as mindfulness or some of the other programs that are being pushed out like it's a religion are good for you, but that's where it stops. They're not good for our patient population, our growing patient population. And politicians, unfortunately, do say, right, tick, we have funded mental health. So this is one of our problems. And we are not talking about mental health here. We're talking about brain disease. There is incredibly loose terminology about mind versus brain. I don't believe that there is mind. I don't know what the hell that is. Philosophers might sort of have some idea about it. Spiritual, religious conversations about the mind might make sense, but it makes no sense when you're looking at somebody with schizophrenia or depression or major illnesses. It's brain. And my colleagues and I, and this is why we're very happy to be in Alfred Brain, agree that we're working on the same organ. It's just they're looking at different bits to the bits that I'm looking at, but it's the same organ. This is the other issue we have, that we have to get that message across, because once you can get that across, that this is a brain, or these are brain conditions, then you open up the doors to different sorts of research, different sorts of answers, different sorts of treatments, and that's really exciting. And I'll just diverge a little bit to tell you a bit about why I was late this morning, and I was planning on being here because I wanted to hear my good colleagues and friends Ingrid and Sharon and others speak, but I got asked to give a second opinion on a 15-year-old girl. And the story is a heartbreaking story. So I saw this girl, and she really is struggling with even I was told she has schizophrenia. So she is hearing voices. She is also seeing things, and what she sees are devils hanging off the tree branches. She can't have a shower because she believes there's cameras in her shower taking a picture of her. And she's really, not able to go to school. She used to be a grade A student at school, and this all started about 2 years ago. Now, with this, there's a couple of episodes of that she fell down, is the descriptor that was given to me by her parent. And all of this has been written down to being a bit histrionic, and a bit sort of putting it on. And that basically, she probably has something underlying it. But of course her parents had split up, and so the child psychiatrists have all focused on the fact that there's disharmony in the house. There was disharmony in the household, and then there was a disruption, and so let's get the parents to talk to each other, and let's get the bonding happening between the mother and child, and so on and so on. And I just feel heartbroken because I'm looking at this girl, and I believe that she has a full-blown psychosis. But more than that, when I took the story of the faints or the hysterical drops, they're actual seizures. And so what I think we're looking at here is somebody who probably has an encephalitic process, an immune-based encephalitic process. Now, in my career, I've seen many patients where you just get this gut sense, because you've seen so many people with schizophrenia or whatever it is, that pattern doesn't fit this pattern. There is something not right. And that's as much science as I can bring to bear at this point. But in speaking with my other new friends and colleagues, what we're doing with this girl is doing, lumbar punctures, doing a whole series of anti-neuronal antibodies, getting decent imaging, getting a good picture of her brain. I can't tell you the punchline or the end of this story, but at least let's make a fist of it, because there's nothing that, is worse than watching this young brain deteriorate in front of us. A grade A student who at the moment has to have her mum put the toothpaste on the toothbrush because she just can't do anything, who's being battered with antipsychotics left, right and centre to no great end. So this is what I mean by the revolution. You see, we really have an issue here. The lack of neurobiology thinking in the profession of psychiatry, particularly child and adolescent psychiatry, although adult psychiatry is not brilliant either, has really led to some terrible disasters for people in the quality of their life. It is not about the sorts of things that politicians say they're funding. We need to get to them to say, fund this, fund brain research in these conditions. Sure, dementia is receiving some good and well-needed funding and resourcing, but this is an area where we need a lot more. And everybody is not an expert on mental ill health. They're an expert on mental health, perhaps, but the stigma and mythology is still prevalent for diseases like schizophrenia, bipolar, etc., because we haven't got the objective markers to be able to say this is this and that is that. So again, the mention of research is very minimal, the neurobiology is missing, and the brain is missing. And there's all sorts of things like, we're told that the suicide epidemic is with us. Yes, there are increasing rates of suicide, but to have statements from politicians that, we will invest $8 million over the next 4 years and that will fix suicide in Australia is ridiculous. We're dealing with huge problems that are multifactorial. So again, we're behind the 8 ball in a lot of ways. We do need biological understanding. Of course, psychosocial factors affect outcomes, but in what illness is that not true? You can have diabetes and it is affected by environmental factors. Of course it is. So we're not saying that psychosocial factors are not important, but we haven't got the first base, which is the formal diagnostic tests. Also, don't buy the we can prevent mental illness if you invest in organisations that are very well funded for prevention of mental illness. We don't know what causes. I mean, like I gave you the example of this poor 15-year-old who may well have an immune encephalitic process causing brain inflammation, causing the symptoms. She may not. But how are we going to be preventing mental illness when we don't really know what the cause is? And so I find this an incredible grab by the loud voices in psychiatry that resonate with political need to tick boxes and say we've got this sorted. So again, organisations like Beyond Blue, what did they do? They did some very good things by educating the public so that they decrease the stigma, so that somebody with depression, and they particularly focused on depression, will not feel like they can't go and talk about depression. So that's a good thing, but that's not prevention. That is about public education. Okay, so now the problem is we've got an aware community who are saying, okay, I'm aware that I'm mentally ill because I've got this terrible depression, fix it. And then we say, well, we've got some SSRIs and we've got some SNRIs and, see you later. And we need more. We need to understand the different depressions. I'm working on all sorts of different treatments, and some of which are weird and wacky, including HRT and so on, because we're seeing the 16-fold increase in perimenopausal depression. 16-fold increase, and that is one of the fastest growing suicide demographics between 43 and 52-year-old women. The fastest one is 85-year-old and plus men, not youth suicide. So again, you see, we've got to go back to the figures and think about what is going on there and go into a biopsychosocial approach. So diagnostic tests, what stage are we in? That's pretty much where we're at. We don't have the ECG for the mind. We need help here. And this is where, engineering students or engineering approaches or IT with artificial intelligence, bring it on, because this is wide open. Let your mind roam and bring in all the different sorts of science that you have at your fingertips to come in and help with such sorts of things as diagnostic tests. I've had forays with my bioengineering colleagues into an ear probe in which we tried to measure the vestibular system as a window to the brain, and use a tilt test as a challenge to the vestibular system, and then took readings. Now that's been very interesting, but the problem is the commercialisation sort of black hole swallowed that one up, and so we're still waiting to see where that next bit of research is going to go. But that was one foray. Like that, we need many, many more people to come in from all different angles to actually help us with diagnostic tests. So the road to effective treatment is the correct diagnosis. And at the moment we don't have that, which leads to problems of illness definition. So what's the way forward? I'd underline, put this in bright flashing letters, and I do mean neuroscience of all different types, so we can do all sorts of things to get back into the brain for emotional and cognitive symptoms. And there are some things that we think are really interesting and moving forward, such as brain stimulation treatments, deep brain stimulation, and integrated treatment approaches, such as using implicated genes with putative neurochemistry with the observable phenotypes to lead to this. I told you a real-life example from this morning about schizophrenia and the autoimmune encephalitis connection, so watch this space, because we're going to be doing work in this space right now, but many other conditions, including the last one, and that's a whole other soapbox, because personality disorder is the most stigmatising and insulting and wrong diagnosis for this group of women, who by and large are the young women who've had incest or assaults or some sort of horrible early life trauma. They have trauma, And trauma lifelong leads to a whole bunch of symptoms which exactly mirror what this group have, and that is the same as PTSD with the war veteran where the grenade went off, but we can't see the grenade as easily. So again, you know, that is a terrible thing to say to someone. They've got a personality disorder. There's not much we can do. Okay, so I've got lots of soapboxes, but, you know, in the end, we need to do better for patients like this. It's not her real photo. And this is a young woman who was sexually abused from the age of 8 to 14, and now she has deliberate self-harm, she has concentration and memory problems, she also has rage problems, but she also has a number of, again, I come back to it, you know, some of the work we're doing is looking at some of the immune markers. We're also looking at some of the brain changes in some of the receptor sensitivities, and they mirror what goes on in PTSD, and it opens the door to use PTSD treatments for Emma, which actually are suiting and helping better. So there's 5 neurobiology psychiatrists in Melbourne and Sydney, and there's probably another 3 nationally. That's pathetic. So I would urge this crowd to come on board, because we need you if psychiatry is not going to become another climate change disaster. Thank you.